and to the bathroom skank. Come off your tower this hour and take a musical shower.
What did you say?
Grab your towel.
All right, we're back. Let's see. It's a gray and raw morning. I claim to like this weather, but I don't like it without my gloves. Right. Illumination. So, what constitutes a system? We're finally getting into some of the subject matter of the class. I encourage you to read the Kuhn. It's actually I reread it yesterday. It's better than I remembered. But he gives a very good introduction to sort of the things that I've been talking about. In particular, he outlines what constitutes a system, and the three things that he points to in particular. Yes, blinking red light. That's good. Are that it has boundaries. That is, we can say what's inside the system and what's outside the system. That's actually a very important part. It has elements. It has things that are inside the system, and it has a purpose. And that purpose can sometimes be a little difficult to really clearly articulate, but it does something. And he goes on to point out that there are simple systems that have connections and have boundaries, but don't have particularly interesting behavior because there's no feedbacks, and I'll get back to a feedback in just a minute. So the examples that he gives, well, apropos of today, are when it rains. The rain falls on, well, he says agricultural fields, but it falls on wherever the rain falls. The water flows downhill and carries materials with it, and then goes someplace else. In the case of Lake Mendota, or in the case of the let's say the farmland north of here, the rain falls on the fields. It takes some nutrients and soil with it. It flows into the Yahara River, say, flows into Lake Mendota, and carries on. And we can draw a boundary around, let's say we're interested in nutrients on the farm. We draw a boundary around the farm. The water falls on the farm, flows through the field into probably either through tiles or through other drainage, and eventually into the Yahara. And we draw the simple boundary, of course, would be the property line of the farm. And so the system there is the rain flowing through the system. That's a simple system. There's no the picking up of the nutrients or the soil from the fields doesn't change how the rain falls. It doesn't change how. Well, this one's a little bit less obvious. Doesn't change how the rain flows out of the system. Although, if you expand, well, never mind. That's conceptually it. I'm waffling because, in fact, the erosion does go somewhere, and if you, in the context of the field, it flows out of the field and doesn't affect the erosion on the field. You don't have to go very far before the soil starts to fall out of and clog things up, and that does change the flow. But more interesting systems are systems that have feedback. And the system that Kuhn presents, and that we're going to spend a little time talking about, more time than you might think, is his filling tank. And I'm pretty sure you will have had plenty of time to stare at that image at the beginning of this video as I played you some as yet to be identified music. But anyway, there's the tank. That's what we start with. You know, we could put it on a stand like this, say, and then there would have to be one in the back maybe. Anyway, that's the tank. And it has an outflow at the bottom, and it has an inflow at the top. And water comes out, and it has a water level. And the water flows out. And in this simple system, this is kind of like the farm field. The water flows in, fills the tank for a little while, and then flows out again. And there's all kinds of math about how fast it flows in and how fast it flows out and how high the thing is. And one of the oh man, I didn't really like math until I got to calculus, and in my senior year in high school. And in calculus, it all fell together because it all had to do with the filling of a bathtub. But anyway, that has to do with how high this level is related to these two inflows. And as Kuhn points out, the rate at which this flows out, so if we call this, let's call this D, the rate at which things come out here are going to be some function of D. All right, so we have this tank, and it's kind of a system. And in Kuhn's world, well, in our systems definitions here, sometimes colors turn up and sometimes they don't. The boundary of our system hopefully I've left enough room, is something like that. And this is the Kuhn's simple no feedback system. Now, let's say we want D to be some specific value. Well, then Kuhn adds, it's a little confusing, he adds his fulcrum here and a lever that comes down to a valve. And he has a float there. So the elements of this system are this float and lever bit, the water flowing in, and the tank itself. Now, as this goes up, how does this work? I always get this confused. Right, yeah, so we don't want the water level to go, say, above some level. So as the water level goes up, the float goes up, because the fulcrum's over here, this goes up, and so the valve goes up. And so it lets more water out. Now the other way to do this, which makes a heck of a lot more sense to me, and in a moment I'm going to ask you what the analogy is. Another way to do this is to put a lever off here, and I'm sorry I don't have a third color, so that when the float goes up, the valve goes down and it shuts off the input. But the point of the exercise is that by adding this mechanism, the system starts to have a purpose, and that purpose is to have the tank filled at some level D. So now, What is the analog in your living life, your domestic, your shelter? What is this an analog to? Yeah, right. This is basically how a toilet bowl, how a toilet tank fills up. I'm not going to do the additions and all. So, but this is a system. It has a purpose to control the water level in some tank at some level D. It has elements. It has these mechanisms. It has the tank. It has a boundary. Now out here in the wild is, well, let's draw one like is around where I'm at. The ones out here are more like this. And one says Westport. And there's a pipe that goes from the water tank to this tank system. That's not part of the system. Kuhn calls that the environment. And then similarly, there's a pipe here that probably goes to a water treatment plant. I don't know how to draw a water treatment plant. And then into the Mississippi River. Right, so that's what a system. That is a quick introduction to a system. And I'll be back with more shortly.